If you're wondering whether investing in a drug and alcohol testing program along with supervisor training is worth it, here's why it absolutely is. First, a drug-free workplace isn't just a policy. It's a commitment to safety. Employees under the influence of drugs or alcohol pose serious risks, especially when operating vehicles, heavy machinery, or handling hazardous materials. Preventing impairment helps protect everyone on the job site. Second, substance misuse doesn't just affect the individual. It impacts team dynamics, morale, and overall performance. When even one employee is impaired, it can reduce the effectiveness and safety of the entire organization. And last, if your company receives federal contracts or grants, you're required to comply with federal, state, and local regulations regarding substance abuse prevention. Staying compliant not only protects your funding, it also reinforces your company's reputation and integrity. Implementing a drug and alcohol testing program and equipping supervisors with the right training isn't just about compliance or performance. It's about doing what's right. Every year, tens of thousands of lives are lost due to substance abuse. The ripple effects extend far beyond personal tragedy. They impact the safety, morale, and productivity of workplaces across the country. Drugs and alcohol can compromise judgment, slow reaction times, and create unsafe conditions for everyone. As a supervisor, you're on the front lines. At some point, you may face a situation involving substance misuse. When that moment comes, being prepared isn't optional, it's essential. By the end of this course, you will be able to understand the steps for identifying employees who may be abusing a substance, determine the appropriate actions and process of identifying employees who may be abusing a substance, and identify the key indicators of substance abuse. You might be asking, how are policy violations detected before they lead to harm? The simple answer is you. As a supervisor or manager, you play a critical role in maintaining a safe and healthy workplace. One of your key responsibilities is to stay alert for signs of substance misuse and take appropriate action when concerns arise. Here's how the process works. Recognize the warning signs. It starts with a suspicion. Maybe an employee's behavior seems off or their performance has noticeably declined. Trust your instincts and observe carefully. Conduct a private interview. Once you've identified a concern, the next step is to speak with the employee. This conversation helps you gather more context and assess whether further action is needed. Determine reasonable suspicion. Based on your observations and the interview, you'll decide whether there's enough evidence to justify reasonable suspicion. If not, you'll move forward to step 6. If there is, you'll proceed with testing. Arrange for testing. If testing is warranted, it's crucial to act quickly and responsibly. Ensure the employee doesn't drive themselves, especially if impairment is suspected. Help them get home safely after the test. Document everything. Thorough documentation is essential. Record what you observed, the steps you took, and any outcomes. This protects both the company and the employee. Follow up. Finally, coordinate with human resources to ensure proper follow-up. Whether the suspicion was confirmed or not, maintaining clear communication and support is key. Let's talk about the first step, establishing grounds for suspicion. Grounds for suspicion may be when the employee has an accident involving a company vehicle or personal vehicle used for business purposes, has an on-the-job accident, or exhibits severe changes in behavior, attitude, physical appearance, speech, or body odor. We'll talk more about these changes later. It's important to note that the only thing you need to do is recognize the signs and begin the investigation process. However, you should never diagnose a problem. That does not fall within the scope of your responsibilities. In other words, don't assume that an employee's problem is caused by drugs or alcohol. Sometimes the behaviors, symptoms, or signs you will see are related to substance abuse, and sometimes they are not. You must follow the entire process of identifying substance abuse in the workplace. Remember, having an initial suspicion is only the first step. For example, a worker caring for a terminally ill parent or going through marital difficulties may exhibit symptoms such as being tired or having mood swings. A worker dealing with these types of situations may exhibit signs of a substance abuser when they are not. Events that have the potential to impact workplace performance include the following. Life events. Some situations at home can overwhelm a person and cause their behavior to change. Workplace stress and organizational culture can create a change in a person's behavior. Think about the requirements of projects or programs that cause workers to work long hours, in excess of 40-hour weeks, or even work overnight. Possibly demanding or tense environments on the job, or downsized teams could be the root cause of the behavior. Remember, in the personal realm, an employee may be dealing with a major life change. These stressors can evoke behaviors similar to those resulting from substance use or abuse. Keep them in mind when you notice a change in behavior that may indicate a problem. The best way to avoid the risk of assuming that an employee's problem is caused by drugs or alcohol is to focus on performance. Employees are hired for their ability to do the job. Performance changes may be related to process, methods, policies, or other issues, or they may be indications of substance abuse. Your best bet is to focus on performance. If someone isn't doing their job well, you need to investigate and document what is going on regardless of whether the issue is related to substance abuse or not. If you see any signs of substandard performance, you should go ahead and conduct an employee interview to let the person know you are concerned and to determine what is going on. So, what are the signs we keep mentioning that an employee may be abusing a substance? There are some specific indicators you may observe. One of the most obvious is the presence of a substance. If you see any contraband or evidence, confiscate it. Contraband or evidence may include alcohol, alcohol containers such as flasks or bottles, drugs which may be powders, pills, liquids, or joints, and drug paraphernalia such as pipes or needles or anything else used to take drugs. If you find needles or anything sharp, be sure to maintain your own safety, wear gloves, and secure dangerous objects out of harm's way. Another of the potential indicators of substance abuse is an employee's physical condition. Substance abusers may have slurred speech, seem unusually drowsy or unusually hyperactive, or exhibit impaired coordination and reaction times. Substance abusers may also have changes to their physical appearance. For example, you may see increased acne or that the employee seems malnourished or exhibits poor hygiene. In addition to changes in their physical appearance, you may also notice changes to their physical condition. For example, a substance abuser may have poor vision, tremors or convulsions, frequent illnesses, constricted or dilated pupils, nausea, or sweating without being exposed to heat. Substance abusers may also have significant changes in appetite. Another of the potential indicators of substance abuse is an employee's emotions. Wide mood swings, excited one moment and depressed the next, are considered a sign of substance abuse. So is unwarranted suspicion or complaints about others not linked to an event that may have precipitated the behavior. Unreasonable resentments, emotional outbursts, or mood changes after lunch or a break are other indicators. So is a significant change in personality. Everyone has a normal range of emotions based on many factors. It's the extremes that are cause for concern. The rate and degree of change may be a better indicator than the person's emotions, as some people may have circumstances that generate an extreme or drastic action that may or may not be related to substance abuse. Actions are another category of indicators of potential substance abuse. Pay attention to workers who become withdrawn or improperly talkative. Also notice if they begin to spend excessive time on the phone. Consider those who begin to be regularly argumentative or who have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. When employees avoid interacting with their managers or supervisors, it may be because of fear or anxiety, or it could be substance abuse. An alarming indicator may be if the employee displays violent behavior or makes threats. Note that behavior that is violent or threatening requires immediate attention and the intervention of your human resources personnel in accordance with your company's policies. Absenteeism is another potential indicator of substance abuse. Absenteeism is frequent or habitual absence from work. Watch for increased absenteeism or tardiness, patterns of absenteeism on Mondays, Fridays, or after holidays, frequent emergency absences, unexplained disappearances during the workday, frequent requests to leave work early, repeated absences from the workplace or job site that occur more than required, long breaks, and repeated complaints of physical illnesses on the job, which result in reduced productivity. These can all be indicators of substance abuse. Safety-related incidents are another indicator of possible substance abuse. As with threats of or actual violent behavior, incidents require immediate attention. Substance abusers may take needless risks in the workplace. An unexplainable increase in on-the-job or off-the-job safety-related incidents that affect job performance and a disregard for the safety of others may be attributable to substance abuse. Substance abusers may exhibit changes in their work patterns, such as inconsistency in the quality of work and high or low periods of productivity. Substance abusers often use poor judgment or have incidences of increased mistakes. They may experience difficulty concentrating and remembering information or instructions that go beyond the scope of learning a new method of performing tasks. They may also have difficulty handling complex situations. The relationships a substance abuser has with others can also indicate that they have a substance abuse problem. Substance abusers may overreact to real or imagined criticism or avoid or withdraw from their peers. There may be an increased number of complaints about the substance abuser from coworkers. Substance abusers may try to borrow or steal money from coworkers. An impaired worker may also make persistent requests for job transfers or complain about problems at home. Let's say you have observed some substance abuse indicators in an employee and have an initial suspicion of substance abuse. The next step in the process is to conduct an employee interview. The employee interview is an opportunity for you to gather more information about the indicators you've observed. When you approach the employee, act in a calm, quiet, and professional manner. You should conduct the interview in your office or in some other private location. Try to have a second management person witness the interview and help you take notes. If your company has an employee interview guide, use it to document your conversation. After the interview, send applicable information to your human resources representative. There are some things you should not do in an employee interview. Remember not to diagnose the problem. Your job is just to gather information. If the employee resists being interviewed, don't force the conversation. Instead, have a witness and document the employee's reaction. Never violate the employee's privacy by discussing the issue with other employees. Finally, try not to get sidetracked into discussions about other issues during the interview. Stay focused. So far, you've had an initial suspicion and gathered and documented information in the employee interview. Now, it's time to determine if you have a case for reasonable suspicion. What exactly does reasonable suspicion mean? Reasonable suspicion is a legal standard of proof in United States law. It can't be based on a feeling or hunch. It has to be based on specific facts or observations. When you put all those facts together, you should be able to make some rational inferences from them. What should you do if you aren't sure that you have reasonable suspicion? Use the reasonable person standard. Would someone else in your shoes look at the facts and have the same suspicion as you? If the answer is yes, it's likely that you have enough evidence to merit reasonable suspicion. In this course, we are talking about reasonable suspicion that someone is violating company policy. If you have reasonable suspicion, that means you've observed specific actions that would lead any reasonable person to believe that an employee may be abusing a substance. When you think you have reasonable suspicion that an employee is abusing drugs or alcohol, make sure to consider all variables we talked about. People with allergies, colds, ear infections, or other physical maladies may exhibit behaviors that can look like drug or alcohol use. For example, someone who has an inner ear infection may lose his or her balance. Someone who has been drinking might do the same. People who are irritable or tired could be abusing a substance, or they could be going through some personal problems that are keeping them up at night. When in doubt, remember to use the reasonable person standard and look at behaviors in context. Put together what you've observed with what you learned from the employee interview in order to determine reasonable suspicion. When you do see a behavior that constitutes reasonable suspicion, try to obtain witnesses to the behavior, such as another supervisor. If possible, have the same supervisor attend the employee interview with you. They can help you determine if there is cause for reasonable suspicion and can also support your assertion that there is reasonable suspicion. Finally, if you are still unsure if you have reasonable suspicion, feel free to contact the Human Resources Department at your company for advice and guidance. So far, you've had an initial suspicion, gathered and documented more information in the employee interview, and determined if you have a case for reasonable suspicion. If you determine that there is not reasonable suspicion, you would skip to step 6. But if you determine that there is reasonable suspicion, you'll proceed to the next step, conducting drug and alcohol testing. Only supervisors who have been trained to recognize the signs of drug use and alcohol misuse may determine when reasonable suspicion testing is warranted. Always inform Human Resources when an employee is being tested due to reasonable suspicion of substance abuse. When you have determined that an employee needs reasonable suspicion testing, contact your Human Resources representative to coordinate testing at your company's designated collection site or testing center to arrange for a collection. Next, you may have to transport and accompany the employee to the collection site. This may be harder than it sounds. Remember that you can't coerce the employee or use force. In addition, be aware that an employee who has used drugs or alcohol may exhibit irrational behavior or become violent. Consult your company's policy for information about best practices about what you can and should do when transporting or accompanying employees to collection sites. If the employee declines testing, remind the employee of company and regulatory policies. At the testing site, the most common substances that an employee will be tested for include alcohol, amphetamines, marijuana or THC, cocaine, opiates, and phencyclidine or PCP. An alcohol test must be performed by a trained breath alcohol technician or BAT. The technician conducts the test using federally approved evidential breath testing devices, commonly known as breathalyzers. Breathalyzers determine blood alcohol concentration or BAC by measuring alcohol on the breath. Both negative and positive results are reported directly to the company contact person by a medical review officer or MRO. Now, let's talk about the drug testing process. It begins when a technician collects a urine specimen. A strict chain of custody and control process is used, and the collection site ships the specimen overnight to a laboratory for analysis. If the presence of drugs is confirmed, the medical review officer is notified. The MRO verifies the test results and provides the employer with the results. Drug testing should be part of the overall program used by employers in an effort to reduce the risk of substance-abusing employees and the liability they bring to the workplace. Most drug testing is accurate. However, it's important to remember that tests can fail. When tests fail, employees may be falsely accused of substance abuse, or those who are abusing substances may not be detected. Another challenge you may face is that some states have ruled drug testing illegal, except where required by law for transportation workers, and those in safety-sensitive fields or when reasonable suspicion of substance abuse exists. It's important that you're aware of these state requirements and of your own company's policies regarding drug testing. If you have questions, one of your best sources of information will be through your HR manager or personnel. Another consideration that you may encounter is, what happens if an employee is unable to provide a sufficient urine specimen for drug testing? The employee will be allowed to remain at the collection site for a limited time in order to provide a sample. This should be a reasonable amount of time, not an all-day event. It's important to remember, you cannot coerce an employee in providing a sample. Keep the following information about drug and alcohol testing in mind after an accident. As alcohol and drugs are metabolized by the body, test results change. To ensure that you get an accurate picture of an employee's condition at the time of an accident, you need to complete testing as soon after the accident as possible. Company policies may vary, but a general rule is that post-accident alcohol testing should be administered within 2 hours of the accident and may be done by law enforcement or other certified BAT technicians. If more than 8 hours have elapsed since the accident, then the results may not be valid. So far, you had an initial suspicion, gathered and documented more information in the employee interview, and determined if you had a case for reasonable suspicion. If you determined that there was not reasonable suspicion, you skip to step 6. If you determined that there was reasonable suspicion, you made arrangements to have an alcohol or drug test administered. If testing was conducted, the employee needs to get home safely. How you go about ensuring the employee makes it home will depend on your company's policy. The policy may require you to offer to call a cab, relative, or friend to come collect the employee. Provide other transportation or transport the employee to his or her home yourself. You should make every legal and reasonable effort to encourage the employee to accept transportation and not attempt to drive. If the employee refuses, you must advise the employee of the consequences. Remember not to use force or coerce the employee. After you get the employee home safely, it's time to gather all your notes and documents pertaining to the situation. Even if no testing was performed, you will still need to document the event. If there was testing, contact Human Resources for test results to determine the next steps. The very last thing to do in the process is to notify the employee. Once again, it is highly recommended that you coordinate with your HR personnel as to the actions that will need to be taken and make the determination as to who will reach out to the employee with the information concerning the event. Let's review your key responsibilities when it comes to this reasonable suspicion training. As a supervisor, your role in supporting a drug and alcohol-free workplace is critical. Here's what you're responsible for. Know and follow the organization's policies. It is very important that you know and understand your company's drug and alcohol policy and ensure you and your team members comply with it at all times. Provide employees with the company's drug and alcohol policy, and it is highly recommended that you obtain signed acknowledgement forms. Seek guidance when needed. If you encounter issues related to substance misuse, consult your human resources team for support. Recognize the warning signs. Stay informed about the indicators of substance abuse, so you can act quickly and appropriately. Act promptly on testing instructions. When directed, make sure employees report immediately for drug and alcohol testing. And last, communicate and document all the information you obtain during the process. By now, you should be able to recall the steps for identifying employees who may be abusing substances, understand what to do and what not to do during the identification process, recognize the indicators of substance abuse with confidence. The last thing you will need to do is check your knowledge on the concepts presented in this training.